So, Jeff, I have been thinking a lot about stuff that I don't understand.
Of
And
which
and
there
not
is much.
but not just like the topics that I don't understand, but like thinking about the concept of not getting something and something that I don't get, something that for whatever reason has escaped me. And I understand it cognitively, but the thing I just haven't been able to pick up is manifesting. I haven't been able to pick that up. Do you manifest?
I think I do manifest, but I think that when I manifest, it's more me wishing or me wanting something and just feeling like I want it. Um, but I don't think that that does me any good. I think that dreaming can be helpful because, you know, you can start to push the boundaries of maybe what you could be as you dream, and then you can start to define those into what you actually want and then goals. But manifesting seems like you know what you want, and then you just try and be there for a minute. Something I do not like, and this is just me, trying to picture what it would feel like to be at a certain place, because I want to reserve that feeling for when I'm there, not for now, because then it's like I'm giving myself the reward without any hard work, you know. But manifesting or just thinking of me being there, I guess I've done it. I don't think it does me any good, because I think that then it starts me just being like, me thinking of this mythical world, but I'm not actually doing anything for it. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm going to manifest right now. And I want you to bear with me because I want this podcast to get sponsored by Audible. So I'm going to talk about Audible for a second. Because I so this last little bit I've started thinking, when the Audible Plus catalog first came out, and if you don't know what that is, essentially included in your Audible membership, you get access to a bunch of other titles, a lot of classic books, some new releases. Essentially, you just get access to a bunch of included content with your membership. And when the Audible Plus catalog first came out, I spent like an hour every single day because there was just new stuff coming out left and right. And then it went to weekly, and I was just always checking out all the new stuff coming out. And I loved it. And when that happened, I added like 500 books to my library. And since then, I've removed a lot of them. I've read many of them. But as I was thinking of the next book to read, I was just cruising. I was like, I wonder about all those plus catalog books that I've just kind of added throughout, you know, the last couple years since it's been on. So I was looking through that, and one of the books I recently read was The Compound Effect, which surprisingly was part of the Audible Plus catalog. I was like, sure, I'll read that. I've had it recommended to me a couple times. It's by Darren Hardy, and it was a pretty good book. Kind of in more in the self help type area. And I feel like that's not normally. I don't really read a lot of self help books, but I thought it was really good. It checked a lot of the boxes you know, that I look for in a self help book. Um, I think specifically like it's not too long. You can't have a self help book that's too long. Same with a business book. Just if it gets too long, then it's just like I don't want it. And the next, it needs to be actionable. It needs to have things that like I can do today. And that's actually the whole point of the book.
I've never read it, but I did pull up like a little thing for it, and I loved this um, paragraph because it's so accurate. And it says, "It's time someone told you straight. You've been bamboozled for too long. There is no magic bullet, secret formula, or quick fix. You don't make $200,000 a year spending 2 hours a day on the internet, lose 30 pounds in a week, rub 20 years off your face with a cream, fix your love life with a pill, or find lasting success with any other scheme that is too good to be true." I've never read this book. but that is a note from Darren, according to this website. And I really like that.
And that's exactly what this book is about. You can probably infer from the title, the compound effect, but it's about essentially the basic ethos of the book is doing little things. I guess it's not really an ethos, but the basic premise of the whole theory of the compound effect is do little things today, um, and they build up to big things. That everything that you do is building a habit. Everything you do is pushing you in a certain direction and is building momentum in that direction. So if you want to build momentum in the right direction, you have to do little things every day. Whether, if you want to eat healthy, you are a little bit more conscious at every single meal what you're eating, and you work out a little bit more. You make sure you stand a little bit more often every day at the office. Little things like that, obvious things. And I say that, and I was reading it, and it was like, duh. Obviously, everybody knows that. It seems like such conventional wisdom, but the way that the author packages it and gives it in kind of a nice perspective. I think just having it all at once, all in one place, it was actually, I've actually felt that it was really helpful, even though nothing was really like so groundbreaking, but it was just really nice to have all that stuff in one place in a nice, short, compact book.
Well, I really think back to that phrase like success breeds success. It's like you do kind of go from one success to another, and then you almost have a culture of success. And I I think that the compound effect probably is exploring a little bit of that, which makes me really want to read it because that's a phrase that I really like. But for me, I think two things stop me is that one, at what point are you succeeding? Like at what point is a little success, and then how do you keep up that momentum? Because we're inevitably going to fail. So it's not like success breeds success and then you're always going to have success. Like there will be failures. So how do you compensate for those to keep yourself on the general track? You know, be interesting to think of what he does. So I mean, I know that you've made a lot of changes in your life recently. How did this book, like what gelled with
Right.
you about the book?
Right. So, for anyone listening to this book who probably doesn't know me on a personal level, I recently lost quite a bit of weight, actually, um, over the last couple of months, and I just was in a place where I was in constant pain in my knees and my back. I wasn't happy. I didn't have a lot of energy, and I just needed to. I needed a change, and I wasn't happy. Um, I felt like I wasn't giving my all, and I found myself in ways, like I said, not a lot of energy, and not 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 allowing myself to live life the way I wanted to live it. So I made a lot of changes, started eating a lot healthier, and started working out a lot more. And all this took place before the compound effect. But in my health goals, I hit a wall. And actually, at the time when I read this book, I was actually at that wall because I was pretty frustrated. I was felt like I'd made a lot of progress, and now I just hit a wall. And I felt like I wasn't making progress. I felt like I was working harder and harder than ever, but I wasn't gaining any results. And this book helped reaffirm that perspective that I don't want to have a healthier lifestyle, for next month or even next year, but for the rest of my life. And that even though I'm not seeing results today, I know if I choose to eat a salad instead of a cheeseburger, my body's going to function better. I know that if I get enough sleep, I get more sleep as opposed to less sleep, sitting up watching TV, that my body is going to feel better and I'm going to be able to respond more positively to everyone around me. I know that if I go work out, that I'm going to have more energy. I it's just doing these things, and even though I'm not, you know, even though I'm not seeing results today, I'm going to see results in the long term. So it was just a reaffirming place when I hit that wall to get back on the horse and just reaffirm to myself that I'm doing this for the long haul. I'm doing this not for tomorrow or next year, like I said, but for the rest of my life.
Mm, powerful. Yeah, I really like that. Actually, that starts to touch a little bit on one of my books. Would you be okay if maybe we hopped
Yeah.
over to there? So,
Yeah. Let's rock and
uh,
roll.
one of the books that I had read recently is called The Founders, and it's the story of PayPal and the entrepreneurs who shaped Silicon Valley. So it's by Jimmy Soni and read by Jonathan Ross. And this book gives you the story of PayPal. But the cool thing is it's not just a story of PayPal. It's a story of X.com and the PayPal predecessor, and then turning into PayPal, and then the combining of X.com and PayPal, and then eventually the story of going public and all these different things. So it's this big story. But the reason why there's that connection is when I think of what the employees at PayPal and the managers and all the leaders at PayPal did, man, they had crazy amounts of momentum. Um, I have never worked in
Mhm.
Silicon Valley at that type of startup, but I can imagine it a little bit where, everybody's in the office, everybody's kind of sleeping there, everybody's doing their thing. And that crazy amount of momentum that you feel, I think can be dangerous because it can lead into groupthink or, too much hype. But it was kind of cool as we were kind of talking about the compound effect to see that PayPal in just the 3.5 years of its existence from pretty much founding through IPO, through successful acquisition by eBay, there is a lot of compound effects. I mean, you think of the starting of the first, well, not the first, but the best of the early online banks, uh, and all of the struggles that they had to go through from a regulation perspective, from customer acquisition, from the technology itself, and then having to face competitors, then having a merger, and then eventually going public and then getting acquired. Like all of those are really big steps in an entrepreneurial journey. And PayPal experienced all of them. So, for a little bit of perspective, PayPal was started by a group of people, including Peter Thiel. X.com was founded by Elon Musk after Zip2. These two were battling for market share and then eventually came together, and Elon Musk became the CEO. Really crazy story that I did not know, that he gets kicked out of his company while he's on his honeymoon. So he leaves on his honeymoon and he gets booted. Crazy. Um,
That that's no fun.
no. And it's funny though because he actually like says, "Wow, what a good move." Which is kind of crazy. And he wound up keeping most of his stock in PayPal. He wasn't bitter about it from that perspective, and it obviously made him a lot of money. And then Peter Thiel takes over and takes it. There may have been another CEO in between Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, or there was one that Elon Musk replaced. There was another CEO in there. Um, but anyway, I just think of, our own entrepreneurial journey, Kevin, and like, having, a successful merger, which is insane to even use those two words synergistically because, I have seen like firsthand from clients, so secondhand, because it's not firsthand, but secondhand from clients, I've seen at least 3 mergers, and none of them have been very successful. And in fact, yeah, for the most part, they're laying off a lot of people or they're shutting down the project. In one case, it's pretty much they bought this company and then they shut it down pretty much, not for strategic or not for like competitive reasons, but they just strategically could not make it work. Um, I mean, mergers are really hard. So then doing that in a space that's never been done before. And then, going public, the story behind them going public is really crazy. So they were the very first company to go public after 9/11. So 9/11 happens and tanks the stock market, horrible things. And Peter Thiel, his point was, look, we don't have competition when it comes, not that they were taking advantage of this horrible thing. They were just thinking from their business strategically, what should we do? Because everybody was saying, just wait. And he's like, no, let's go now. because his thought is that there's nothing else to invest in. There's no new IPOs, so that makes them, in a weird way, look a lot better. Kevin, you and I both know somebody that was trying to go public
Hmm.
around that 9/11 timeframe, and they didn't, and that company never really was successful. And I'm not saying that I wonder what they would have done if they would have gone public, but it was a very successful IPO for them, and in such a unique time. And they were doing
Right.
something when nobody else was doing it. And in fact, they were like one of the only. They were like, for the first 3 months or something like that, they were the only IPO. And then eBay comes in, and they just keep getting more and more valuable, and then eventually eBay buys them, and then eBay soon spun it out to be kind of its own independent company. um and it was interesting too, because PayPal like was so dependent, because it was initially just doing payments via eBay. So essentially, like, eBay was their, like, they were like the only public company whose f- total fate was in the hands of another public company. But eBay couldn't have a competitor to their product, and like that would stick. And so then they didn't want to shut PayPal down. And anyway, it wound up kind of working out. So for me, the thing that blows my mind about all of it is that story. There's a lot of really successful, amazing entrepreneurs that kind of come out of what's termed the PayPal mafia, and the book kind of goes into why that's actually not a great um, thing, because I mean they're not like a mafia, um, and
Right.
it just was kind of like
Hopefully.
this. Yeah, no. And also it kind of really diminished the role of all of the amazing women that were in the organizations and things like that. But there were amazing entrepreneurs that came out of that. Like Reid Hoffman is just an example. Would go on to found LinkedIn. But where I was kind of disappointed in the book, although I loved it a lot, and it really inspired me as an entrepreneur. I was like, I mean, because while I don't think that there's all the best things with hustle culture, also if you're trying to do something interesting in the world, you have to hustle at it. Um, but the thing that I was kind of disappointed with the book is I wish that it would have just taken half the book talking about the PayPal experience, and then half the book talking about all of the amazing companies that spawned. Like literally, just one by one, or a chapter going through each different small company. Now that would have been a big book, but I would have loved not just hearing their names and not just having it in the epilogue of what they did. I would have loved to like really go into what they did. And maybe that was the original intention. And I know it's hard to get interviews and stuff like that. But, anyways, overall, really enjoyed it. You learn a lot about business from these things. I actually think that this is, reading a biography of a company is probably a better business book than a book about business. Does that make sense?
No, totally agree. It's it's an example, instead of just vague principles. You see it in action. You see what went well, what didn't, and the good and the bad. Definitely if you want to learn about business, reading about, you know, not just reading business books, but reading books about a business is super helpful, I think. But that's really cool thinking about, I never thought about that. Obviously, I'd heard about Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, but I really wasn't aware that a bunch of different companies spawned from that. And it was pretty recently that I even realized that, you know, PayPal was even as early as it was. I always thought,
Right?
online banks, for whatever reason in my mind, it was like, I'm always thinking like 2010, but they were more than 10 years before that, because
Yeah, they started in like 97 or
pretty
98
much
or
up
something like that.
until, right. Especially because, like, first time I used an online bank was like in college, though
Right.
I didn't really use many banks. But still, people who were maybe in a lot of ways kind of ahead of their time.
Right.
But,
And
hey, it
so,
worked out for them.
Peter Thiel founded Palantir, obviously, which was $1 billion company. Elon Musk would go do Tesla and SpaceX. Then Reid Hoffman would do LinkedIn. Yelp came from there as well. Um, I know that there was others, but those were just kind of the some of the ones. Glow.
Wow.
Um,
I
I mean
mean,
YouTube. Yeah,
even
YouTube.
just
Crazy.
wait, really? YouTube came out of PayPal? I mean, not at a PayPal, the company, but from somebody who worked at PayPal.
Yeah, so Steve Chen, Chad Hurley, and uh, Jawed Karim were all early PayPal employees.
Crazy. That's nuts.
Also, kind of
Crazy.
crazy to
It's
think that
crazy to
they
think
only
how
sold for 1.65 billion. YouTube.
that is crazy to think about now, where it's the second largest search engine in the world, and the first is Google, but half the time people are just Googling YouTube videos. I know when I when I want to find a YouTube video, half the time I Google YouTube video of this. It's like, because so I mean,
Because
if you could factor that in, right. I mean, I wonder if you just took. I wonder if you could take out every, in Google's search numbers in this mythical database that I'm sure that doesn't exist. That has both of them, but you could take out all of the video searches that go through YouTube, or anything that links from YouTube from Google. And if you take that out, I wonder if Google would still be bigger. Probably, but probably not by a lot. Though
no,
also I have
that's
no
an
idea. I'm
interesting
just totally
point.
spinning the wind. But
Yeah.
but
So
I'll be honest.
bottom
Every time
line,
I click on a video and it doesn't take me to YouTube, I just go back,
right,
search for
right.
YouTube.
Also, just for anybody
Sorry,
listening,
you were saying?
we can't have, for some reason, a podcast without having some sort of delay. So that's why we talk over each other. It's not because we're jerks, it's because we always have some sort of weird delay. But that's what we're going to live with, and it's all going to be
Or
good.
we're
Uh,
jerks.
yes. So, what I want
I
to
like to
know
think that we have that
is
option.
oof, I think that the delay is getting worse. Okay, well, why don't you tell me about your second book?
So we were just talking about technology. It actually flows pretty good. So I read a book by Jeremy Parish called A History of Video Games, also on the Audible Plus catalog. Throwing that in, manifest a little bit. Love to get sponsored by Audible. So, Jeff, if you're listening, you know, hit us up. But not that he's probably that involved with Audible, but still manifest. Anyway, but History of Video Games is short book, just under 5 hours, and is really interesting. I mean, I love to read about things that I don't know anything about. I'm not much of a video gamer. I do, as I've admitted in a previous podcast, I do still play my Game Boy Advanced and SP on occasion, but I don't really own any system. I think video games are awesome, and that's why I don't own a system, because I wouldn't be here. I'd be playing them right now. But yeah, it was just cool to learn about video games and learn about how they've been around, and kind of the place that they're taking in our culture.
Maybe double clicking on kind of the role video games have played for people. What were some of the good things about video games, and what were some of the bad things about video games that stood out, if the book covered it at all?
So it didn't hit on it too much, but kind of along the good things. Something that I thought was really interesting. Like, it didn't really go over like what are the pros of cons of using video games. It did hit on a couple of the items that Oregon Trail. Kind of everyone jokes about Oregon Trail, the video game. But it was one of the very first video games ever made. Um, and uh, and it was purely for educational purposes. It was so kids could learn about the Oregon Trail. And also, most video games, like in the early days where everything was made, most of the video games were created, and most of the initial research for video games and interfaces was all done by universities, which is partly why so many different companies can make video games, and why there's so much IP out there that isn't strangleholded, because educational institutions were trying to figure out this computer thing,
Interesting.
which opened up the floodgates for other people to be able to create video games. For the first couple decades, even up till about the 80s, video games were for hardcore developers. They were for people, if you weren't in an arcade, it was people making their own video games. There were a few companies like Atari, and it kind of talks about their rise and fall, and talks about the birth of Nintendo um, Xbox and PlayStation and a bunch of these. But you know, a lot of that came from universities just doing the research before there was that economic driver, and also talking about kind of total U-turn, but maybe not talking about the good, but I feel like it's really easy because every time a movie comes out, there's at least, it was when we were kids, getting a Game Boy game. Every time a movie would come out, there'd be a new Game Boy game about that movie. And most of the time it would suck. And sometimes it would be fun. And sometimes it'd be awesome. But it was kind of easy to come under that perspective when you really weren't in gaming, that all gaming did was follow popular culture, that all it was doing was like, oh, this is popular, I'm gonna make a bunch of video games about it. And it actually talks about that, how you know shoddy video game makers and systems trying to protect their IP, which, because it was kind of on the basis of universities and having it free, how a lot of people can make video games for systems that they don't have any IP for, which is also something I never thought about. um but the whole point was that it went on that video games just didn't follow culture, it dictated culture in a lot of ways. How it pushed, like Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario, these are obvious characters, that came from, Pokemon, all these things, they really started in video games. Um, and then they became popular. And while those are prime examples, it gave a lot of examples in the book of how popular culture actually started to follow video games. And just, I thought that was really interesting, and not I never thought of it like that, because you always think, oh, culture's just this thing, and video games is small. Well, video games, at least in like the tagline of the description of this book, is annually video games gross more than Hollywood does. And I don't know, it didn't really talk about that fact in the book, but when you really break it down, that actually makes some sense.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely not a video game player myself, but I do think that there's a lot of things that it teaches kids about technology. I remember when you and I were kids, we would go over to the Crossman's house, and they would be hooking up for LAN parties, and understanding server capacity, and networking these different computers together, and bandwidth, and all these different things that I was kind of exposed to, that I think is really interesting, just the way that computers can interact uh, together. Um,
Oh my
in
gosh,
fact,
LAN parties.
yeah.
Those were so much fun. Oh man, I totally forgot about those. Just bringing a bunch
Yeah,
of computers into somebody's basement and playing StarCraft on LAN. Oh, that was so fun. I
that
remember we
was.
played StarCraft. There was this one map, I think it was called Godzilla, where you were one of the Protoss, the one that's like this giant energy ball, and everybody would, they could, you just have 1,000 battle cruisers just chasing around Godzilla, and he'd just be throwing these energy balls or whatever. I don't even know what it was, but he just destroyed everything. And it was just everybody versus this one character. I remember how fun that was.
Oh, it was so fun. And for our one listener, Luke Crossman, we got you, brother. Finally got you a shout out on the podcast.
Dude,
Thanks for listening and for leaving a
love you.
comment on all of our videos. You're the best.
Love you, man.
Um, but
But
it's actually interesting.
but yeah,
I hadn't. Maybe say your thought, and then it actually connects really well to my next book.
Oh, so okay, we're playing read my mind. But no, I was just going to say it was really fun reading reading about video games and reading about, you know, how they were, such an integral part of our life and driven so many things, economically, socially, culturally, and just it was cool. Definitely worth a listen.
So one of the earliest video game creators, his name is Richard Garriott, and he's the one that created the Ultima series. And I've never played it, but I know that it was super, super popular. He's the one that, and the reason why it jogged my memory was that he's the one that created the phrase like massive multiplayer online games or whatever. Like that was like multiplayer online role playing games. That's what it is. He's the one that coined that phrase, and he's the one that created.
MMORPG.
That's the one. He's the yeah. So he's the one that created that, and did these big games, and he was the president of the Explorers Club, and I think he couldn't be an astronaut for a few reasons that were health oriented, but he's like one of the only private individuals that's gone to space. I think he went up to the International Space Station, spent like a couple weeks there or something. But what's really interesting is that his dad was an astronaut, and his dad was a Stanford trained engineer, and um, got his son kind of interested in it. And the reason why there's that is that um, my last book is called Moonshot, and it really is interesting how like when you kind of contrast people like the Garriotts, like the very scientific, the scientist astronaut, those did not exist in the early part of the space program, and that's essentially what Moonshot is all about. Um, so Moonshot is the story of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, um, and the astronauts that were there. But it really highlights two main astronauts, and that's Alan Shepard and Deke Slayton, and they were both in the original group of Mercury 7 astronauts, and stayed at NASA for a really long time. And there's a reason why those two are highlighted, not just because they're friends, but and I'll get to that in a second. So Mercury was started. So essentially, there was a lot of test pilots. They were pushing the boundaries of space. They, had airplanes that you would pilot that would go up to, almost 50 miles up in the air. And space starts at mile 63, and so they were really pushing the envelope. When they were kind of presenting a whole bunch of people who could be potential astronauts as the Soviets were initiating the space race, they actually came out and they said, well, maybe explorers or gymnasts or big game hunters or a bunch of different types of personas of people that could handle stress could be good astronauts, because initially they weren't flying the plane or flying the spacecraft. But then Eisenhower said, no, just get test pilots. They're trained for emergency situations. They're in the military command, even though that NASA was a, you know, um, uh, civilian like core. Um, and so they got them. So the initial 7 were test pilots, which included Alan Shepard and Deke Slayton. Deke Slayton was actually the most experienced test pilot. And so what winds up happening is they're starting to fill up slots. They're starting to fill out, hey, here's what we're going to do as far as sending a man up to space first. And so what NASA's plan was to shoot somebody up, have them cross the barrier of space, and then come right back down. Well, just before that
Mhm.
happened, the Russians sent Yuri Gagarin up, and he actually, cleared and did an orbit in space. So they like totally, they totally beat us. But um, the sad part is that if like, oh man, there's a lot to this, but like we totally could have beaten them. Um, but that's a whole nother thing. But Alan Shepard was the very first man in space, so they sent him up for 15 minutes. He came down and was the first American in space. Um, and Deke Slayton was going to be, a little bit farther along, because eventually John, so Gus Grissom goes up and does the same flight. John Glenn winds up orbiting the Earth 3 times before having some issues and needing to come down. So there was a lot of good momentum. Well, Deke Slayton was slated to go when suddenly started to have a heart arrhythmia, so an irregular heartbeat. And he was taken off flight status. And he was obviously devastated. This is exactly what he wanted to do. He was in the field he was in. But the coolest part about him is that he thought and he knew one day that maybe he would go into space, but he needed to figure out this heart thing. But he was totally disqualified. In fact, he even resigned from the Air Force because they wouldn't even let him fly alone. And so what winds up happening with him is that he becomes the head of the astronaut office. So it's actually his job and responsibility to fill out all of the trips. So he winds up spending, literally 20 years of his career just sending his friends up into space. Well, Alan Shepard becomes backup for one of the Gemini missions. So, Mercury was essentially just getting to space. Gemini is understanding space. So, for example, like Ed White was the very first astronaut to go outside of a spacecraft and to actually do a spacewalk. And then Apollo was all about getting to the moon. Well, Alan Shepard, he was a backup for Gemini, and then he wound up having some sort of crazy inner ear issue. Very depressed, it's his dream to go to the moon. And Deke Slayton talks to him. He's obviously, the guy that has the most empathy. He's like, come and join me at the astronaut office. And so the whole story, right, is really about the progress of getting to the moon. It highlights a lot of, how we eventually get to the moon. But my favorite part of, so I have two favorite parts. One is that it focuses a lot on what happens after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins go to the moon. For Apollo 11, and Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong land. They do the first moonwalk, and then it's kind of like everybody's knowledge of the moon goes away. But there's Apollo 12, and then maybe some people remember Apollo 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So there's 6 more flights to the moon. Only 24 people have gone to the moon, and then of those, 12 have walked on the moon. And I think it's really cool to focus on that element of space flight. So the second part that I really, really love was how Deke Slayton and Al Shepard never gave up on their dreams. Because what winds up happening is right at the beginning of the Apollo program, around like Apollo 7 or 8 or something, there's an experimental treatment that could potentially solve this inner ear issue that Alan Shepard has. And he does it. He does this experimental surgery. And it totally works. It restores him to flight status, and then he actually flies on Apollo 14 and walks on the moon. In fact, he was the one that
oh wow,
he was the one that hit the golf ball. So he had this little thing with a little club on it. He hits a golf ball. The other thing that's really interesting about him is that I had recently gone to a space museum and I saw a moon rock that he brought back thinking about his moon flight, and it was really cool. They had the earliest version of the lunar rover, and they were exploring one of the older geological sites. So they had this volcano that had exploded, and they tried to get to the rim to get to some of the oldest rocks. They didn't quite make it to that. It's a really cool story that I didn't know anything about, right? Because you're thinking about this translunar orbit exploration. It's absolutely incredible, and nobody ever talks about it. But then here's my favorite freaking part of everything. Deke Slayton, he just, he has a cold one day, and he just starts stuffing down the vitamins, and then he just kind of keeps taking them because he feels better, and then he notices his heart arrhythmia going away, and he can't explain it. He starts going to all these doctors, and then anyway, so Alan Shepard gets back from Apollo 14, and then Deke's like, please help me convince all these doctors, because he has to have 7 or 8 people, sign him off on this. Well, eventually he does, and then he winds up flying, and he does the first Apollo Soyuz mission. So Soyuz is the Russian aspect. Apollo is the Americans. And Deke Slayton flies up, and they actually dock together, and they wind up going in and shaking hands. So it's kind of this culmination of the Cold War, because you think of when Alan Shepard and Deke Slayton start, and then where they both end their careers. They end racing the Russians. They end with Deke Slayton extending out his hand and shaking the Russian commander's hand. I mean, what an amazing story that I had no idea of. I love that Deke Slayton he just put in the time, and he never gave up on his dream. and he waited the longest of almost any astronaut except for Don Lind, you know. Like, I mean, what an amazing story of not giving up, of sticking to your dreams. And this is like a health thing too. It's not even like his ability. Like, he was very capable of going, he just couldn't, and then they hung in there. And so, super inspirational story from so many fronts. I absolutely loved it. I've listened to a lot of books about space, and I am currently listening to way too many books on space, but this one was honestly one of my favorites, and I loved it a lot.
Okay, those are awesome stories, and I didn't know any of them. But those are all really, really cool. Um, that's nuts to just want to do something so much that you just keep trying for. I don't know how many years we were trying to do that. 10, 20.
Well,
You
so
know, he was part of it.
Deke Slayton becomes an astronaut in like 1957, and then he flies. You know what? I might as well just get you the right dates. Um, so he was in the initial group. Oh, 1959. So he went. So in 1959 he does that, and then he flies on the Apollo Soyuz thing in 1975.
Holy crap.
So yeah,
That is a long time to be
that's a
pushing
long
for
time.
something.
And
Wow.
he was also he was like in so when Apollo 1, killed Roger Chaffee and Gus Grisham and Ed White, he was there. When Apollo 13 was having those issues, like, he was there. He was in the room for everything. He was in the room when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed at their lunar rover. Like, he was the guy. And oh, also really cool thing about him is he flew bombers. He flew bombing missions in the European theater and in the Pacific theater during World War II. So, you have like this war hero, bomber pilot, test pilot, and then eventually he winds up going to space. Such an awesome story. I just loved it so much. I honestly want to listen to it again.
Man, that's the type of life that makes me feel like I really got to step up my game. Like 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 I am currently neither a war hero nor an astronaut. And he was both. And he did a lot of cool stuff, and it really makes me feel like, Kevin, you got to bring something else to the table. Like, some yard work's not going to cut it anymore. You got to step up your game. Oh my gosh. That is awesome. Remind me what the name of this book was.
Moonshot. And I actually believe it's on the
Moonshot.
Audible Plus
Also a
catalog.
great name. What? Check that out,
Yep.
Jeff,
Yeah. Yeah, do
Mr.
it.
Bezos. But
So,
yeah, I'll have to check that one out. That's
oh
oh
no.
man, you
No.
go. No, you go.
Okay. No, I'll go. I'll go. Oh, delays are horrible. We are gonna work on this. I actually didn't really realize the synergy between all of the things we were talking about, like, video games, like the founders, like the entrepreneurship, online banking, with that, and then kind of like the business book and the momentum, building on that, and then Moonshot. Like, I it was kind of cool to think that we thought of these books independently and yet how synergistic they were. That was kind of fun to have that conversation and to be thinking about the role of technology, the role of momentum, the accomplishment of these incredible goals, and how they're all kind of synergistic. That was fun for me. I love this conversation.
Yeah, it definitely felt like we planned it. Um, which, I mean, these are just books we just happen to be reading. And I think like one of the awesome things that I've learned, when you read a lot of books, you start to see how more and more things connect. And that's not just reading books. Like, you learn and you start to see the interconnectivity of so many things. You start to see how other things apply. And four books that are really very, very different. Um, Seeing all these similarities between them. That's just one of the beauties. That's one of the best things about learning. I feel like every time I learn something, I learned that it also relates to something else. That nothing is really by itself. That really it's connected to something else. So, you know, read books, go to the Audible Plus catalog, check some stuff out. There's some good ones. We just gave you a few great ones.
Thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you tuning in, and having the kindness to spend some time with Kevin and I as we discuss this. And we hope that you have a wonderful day. We're excited to come at you next time. And if you have any other suggestions for books that we have to listen to, please give them over to us. Thank you all. We'll talk to you again next time.
See ya.